Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 27 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Ottawa Senators, in which the Sharks have lost 5-2. So just a couple of weeks after the Sharks managed to take it to the Senators and win 5-1, they find themselves on almost the other side of that by losing here 5-2. And generally, in my previous review of the Toronto Maple Leafs game, I mentioned how it actually was relatively similar to the previous one that they had played against the Montreal Canadiens, with the major difference being is that the Sharks did not really capitalize on their offensive opportunities in that game against the Leafs, while they had managed to do so in the game against Montreal. And here tonight, it is kind of similar as well. The saying goes that, once is random, twice is a coincidence, three times is a pattern. So I'm beginning to wonder whether David Quinn specifically wanted the Sharks to actually play a game style like this over this road trip, because once again, this is a game in which the Sharks, you could say on the score sheet, not necessarily in terms of goals, but in terms of, like shots and the likes, you could say that the Sharks were outplayed, as much of the game was played in the Senators' offensive zone compared to the Sharks' offensive zone. However, the Sharks still managed to get their few very good chances here or there. They converted on at least one of them at even strength, another one on the power play, and they also didn't really give much of anything to the Senators at even strength. And you may be wondering, well, the Senators scored 5 goals here. What are you saying that they didn't give much? Well, 3 of those were on the power play, first of all, and the 2 that were on even strength, both the Giroud goals. The first Giroud goal was just an awful giveaway from Matt Benning, which I'll get to a bit later, and the second Giroud goal was after an extended 4-on-3 where the Sharks had many tired players on the ice, and then Hertl ends up getting tripped up near the offensive blue line with 0 call for some reason, which leads to a 1-on-0, sort of 2-on-0 even type of play the other way that Giroud scored on. But otherwise, in terms of like actual real 5-on-5, not kind of weird massive mistakes or missed call type of play, the Sharks kind of shut down what the Senators wanted to do. So generally, they stuck to a game plan that they had used in the first 2 games of the road trip, but because they lost the special team battles by a wide margin here tonight, they end up on the losing side of things. So let's start off in the first period. The Sharks actually scored the first goal of this game. That one came from Tomas Hertl, and obviously this was, a big deal for him, because after the end of that Leafs game, where while it was Matt Benning not necessarily defending Pierre Engvall particularly well, it was Tomas Hertl who had the neutral zone turnover that allowed the Leafs to come in those last couple of minutes to take the lead 2-1. And so Hertl felt, very heavily responsible for that loss, even if it's not necessarily the case. And so he obviously wanted to come out and make an impact, and he did exactly that with this power play goal. The Senators would tie it up with their own power play goal, but then Hertl would get another to make it 2-1, and that would be the score at the end of the first period. However, in the second period, things would get away for the San Jose Sharks. They'd still get their chances here or there, but not enough second and third opportunities on those chances. So Forsberg for the Senators was able to make the save, and the Sharks give up a couple of goals to Giroud and then to Stützle to make it 3-2, and the Stützle goal was another power play goal. In the third period, they'd add their third power play goal of this game to make it 4-2, and eventually, like I said, an extended 4-on-3 power play occurs for the San Jose Sharks. They get so many amazing chances on that one. The Couture shot squeaks through Forsberg, almost squeaks over the goal line before a Senators defenseman cleans it up. A great pass from Carlson to Barabanov for an amazing opportunity. Carlson takes a very good shot for himself. That is a big save, and there were so many looks on this 4-on-3 power play, and yet each and every one just gets stonewalled either by the goaltender or even by a defenseman behind him, and the Sharks are unable to score. The puck then comes up to Hertl at the point eventually when we return to 5-on-5. Hertl gets tripped up by Mott. There is no call on the play. Giroud goes the other way, 1-on-0. It's kind of like a 2-on-0 if he wants to pass it backwards, but he takes a slap shot and manages to score to make it 5-2, and that ended up being the game. Now, before I get to the players, I do want to talk about the penalty kill, because of course the Sharks, as has been the case for much of this season, their penalty kill came into the game at the tippy top of the league, over 90%. The only team that is even remotely close to being over 90%. The other teams are like at, I think, like 85 or 86 is the next closest. The Sharks have had by far the league's best penalty kill this season, but the Senators seemingly exposed them. Maybe this was just a bit of an off night for the Sharks. They had a couple of kills, but on these three power play goals, the first one was actually not bad for the Sharks. They spent a lot of the time in their zone, about like a minute, if not more than that, but they kept the puck to the outside. It's just that the moment that the Senators found a seam, which worked with the bumper in front as Tkachuk tips this puck on net, that's where the Sharks kind of broke down. The tiredness came to them, and the puck quickly made its way back to Tkachuk to make it 1-1 at that time. And then we watch the other two goals. It's a bit less of that strong keeping it to the side, and once again the Senators are able to use the bumper position to actually expose the Sharks' penalty killing by moving this puck quickly and getting openings on the ice. So we see this on the Stützle goal. They pass this one right in front, or they pass this one right to the side of the net, and then a very quick pass in front kind of catches the Sharks defenders off guard to be able to get that goal. And then this third one is the pass across. This one is a bit more of a weaker goal from Kähkönen, I would say. Not necessarily one that you'd like to see go in, but not also the worst thing in the world for a goaltender. Just was just generally a bit of a rough night for the Sharks penalty killing as a whole. On to the players to talk about here. I mean, I mentioned at even strength, the Sharks, they played not amazingly, but it's kind of like that Canadiens game where they actually still played decently well. They got some pretty good chances for themselves. A major issue was indeed them running into penalties, but that was something that happened in that Canadiens game too. They had 5 penalties in that one. It's just that they managed to kill off every single one, and that was not the case here today. So the Meier, Hertl, LeBanc line obviously generated a very good chances for themselves. Hertl almost had a hat trick just in that first period to go with his first 2 goals. He had a third very strong chance. LeBanc, I thought, looked pretty good, made a very nice pass on that second Hertl goal. Meier got a couple of good chances for himself. And so while there were these opportunities, and even though they played a lot of time in the defensive zone, I still thought it was a pretty decent game for this first line. And this is kind of a theme that goes with the rest of the lineup for the San Jose Sharks. If we take a look at this Couture, Barabanov, Nieto line, definitely less chances than what the first line got, but they still had a couple of pretty good shifts, I would say. And I would say they also spent probably the least amount of time in the defensive zone. It's kind of hard to say because, of course, the fourth line does exist and isn't even on the ice a lot, so obviously they're going to just, by comparison, not spend that much time in the defensive zone. But I thought this second line looked pretty decent. And then when it comes to the third line, this is always the wild card line, I guess you could say, just based, a couple games ago, they were one of the best looking lines for the Sharks, but then like a couple games before that, they were one of the worst looking lines, if not the worst working line. And so generally, you don't exactly know what to expect, but there were a couple of good chances once again here for this third line. Bonino had a very good look. Gregor had a pretty decent look. Cunnin had a partial breakaway, or no, a 2-on-1, if I'm not mistaken, where he ends up taking the shot off. This was just kind of, I was watching Cunnin, and you can really see the difference between like a player like Cunnin and like maybe a Timo Meier or an Erik Carlson, where they would probably look off the shot. They'd be looking at their player with them on the 2-on-1 and then take that shot and be able to line it up. But you can see Cunnin makes it very easy to read that he's going to go for this shot instead, which allows the goaltender to make the relatively easy save. So that was a bit of a missed opportunity there, but otherwise, this was a decently defensive game for this third line. With the fourth line, I thought it was okay. Lorentz obviously stood out in a decent light, getting a couple of very good chances for himself, a pretty early on breakaway in this game, as well as a 2-on-1 as well in the second period. He was just unable to bury on either of those chances, and there were some decent shifts for the rest of the fourth line. The major issue is the penalty trouble that the Sharks ran into. Yes, it's nice to be able to rely on your penalty kill, but eventually you will get burned, and that ends up happening here tonight with the 3 power play goals against. And it was Gadjevich taking a very ill-advised slashing penalty. It was Lindblom taking a penalty. And then we also saw, go back to the first line, LeBanc with a couple of tripping penalties for himself. I believe both, if I'm not mistaken, in the offensive zone. At least one of them was in the offensive zone, which is kind of an interesting thing because you can kind of tell when LeBanc is actually putting in that heavy effort is when he takes those offensive zone penalties. Now, obviously, you would like LeBanc to be playing well and not take offensive zone penalties, but it kind of shows that he's a bit dialed into the game. So it's both a bad thing and yet somehow a good thing as well, I would say. On to the defensive players, however. Let's first talk about Erik Carlson, of course, returning to Ottawa here. I mean, this is not the first time this has happened. He's been with the Sharks for multiple years now, but he certainly got some cheers at the start of the game and then a lot of boos when he was holding the puck during the game. But I thought this was probably Carlson's best game of the road trip thus far. Set up a lot of very good plays, had a strong pass to get Hertl his second of the game. He also was the one who took the original shot on Hertl's first of the game, even though he does not actually end up getting an assist in this situation. Carlson set up a lot of very good plays. The Sharks had multiple power plays, even though they only scored on the one, and Carlson was sort of coordinating all of that. So I thought he definitely could have had a couple of assists here tonight if there was maybe a bit more finish from the rest of the Sharks players, and even a bit more finish from himself. Maybe even could have had a goal. The other player who I do want to mention is, of course, Benning. I was looking for a bit of a redemption game from Matt Benning because while he played decently solid enough defensively against the Leafs, his two major mistakes ended up in the back of the Sharks' net, and I was hoping that he could clean that up at the very least a bit here tonight. But still another major mistake. I mentioned it earlier on Giroud's first goal of this game, the one that tied it up at 2 and was the sort of the last time the Sharks actually had the lead in this game. Benning just sends a pass right in front to Giroud. Hertl was in the same sort of area code as this pass, but it wasn't particularly close to landing, and it didn't even necessarily seem like Benning fanned on this pass, and so it just went into a slightly different direction, like the angle was off by 10 degrees. This one seemed as though he was like intentionally passing it to Giroud. Obviously that's not the case, but it certainly looked that way. So very, very bad look for Matt Benning on that particular pass. Otherwise, not a terrible game defensively for him, but like I mentioned in the Leafs review, this is really why Matt Benning had that sort of bad reputation early on with Sharks fans, is because when he makes that mistake, it ends up being quite egregious. And then finally, to talk about Kähkönen in between the pipes here, a very good outing in the previous one against the Montreal Canadiens, obviously picked up that shutout, but here tonight, not so great. He's just continuing to be this very inconsistent force for the San Jose Sharks. I take a look at the goals he let in. Yeah, I didn't have much of a chance on the first Giroud one or the Stützle one, but he probably could have had the Chabot one, and he absolutely could have had the Giroud one. Yes, this is a breakaway / 2-on-0 situation, but Giroud literally walks in and takes a slap shot from pretty far out, and Kähkönen cannot make the save on that one, especially looking at that just after Forsberg stood on his head and made multiple amazing saves on the Sharks 4-on-3. You're kind of hoping your goaltender can come up for a big save in the 4-on-2 or a 4-2 game situation, and Kähkönen was unable to do so. So a bit of a rough game for him, and the Sharks are getting into another back-to-back situation, as that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action tomorrow for a game against the Buffalo Sabres, and it'll be interesting to see if Aaron Dell gets the look again. While Dell was maybe not as impressive as Kähkönen was in the back-to-backs against the Canadiens and the Leafs, with this pretty bad performance tonight from Kähkönen against the Senators, it's very possible we once again see Dell. Unless Reimer comes back from injury, that's a possibility, but otherwise I do expect to see Aaron Dell against his technically former team in the Sabres. Class dismissed.